My role in Ponte is the peacebuilding desk officer. I think I'm still the only peacebuilding desk officer of an Italian NGO so far, but I hope the group will grow. And it was actually, I didn't find this job, I created this job, so that's the way to make space for this field in the Italian universities, in the Italian NGOs, and within Italian think tanks. So if you believe that it makes sense to work on peace by peaceful means, then you have to create the space for it within organizations, create the funding opportunities for it, and establish long-term relations with all the stakeholders that can support you. And then once you've done it and you start doing the job, it gives you so much satisfaction. So our experience is the experience of an NGO that was born in 1991 out of the Italian anti-war movement, and out of people from the Catholic world, from the radical left, from many different environments that wanted to say, we cannot just oppose the war. We need to build bridges of solidarity with the Iraqi people in that case, because it was the first Gulf War. And then the NGO started to build these links with the Iraqi people. And we have been doing a very political work in the sense that, for example, we were advocating against the embargo, but we were also doing humanitarian work to support the Iraqi people. And since 2003, we've been working to strengthen civil society, local civil society in Iraq, but also in many other countries that were hit by wars or military occupations. And the first job I've done in this NGO was organizing training programs, workshops on nonviolent action. So our first approach to the peacebuilding field was how to support civil society actors in Iraq that had decided that they radically wanted to refuse the violence as a logic to build social change. So they wanted to go through non-violent means, but they wanted to be effective. They wanted to believe that they could promote change, political change, social change in Iraq. And so we just basically discussed about campaigning and developing strategic campaigns, strategic nonviolent struggle under a principle point of view and under a strategic point of view. And from there, we understood that the negotiation, the mediation, the dialogue capacity of Iraqi civil society was huge with respect to the political level. And the achievements they could get by doing, grassroots mediation in many conflict situations was really important. And it needed visibility, it needed support. And that's how we decided to start lobbying and advocating with international donors, with the international community, to fund peace-building programs, not at the top level, but at the community level, at the grassroots level. So, passing from the field of nonviolent action, nonviolent struggle for human rights, to the field of peace building as we mean it in this room, it has one big thing in common. To do that, you need to have a lot of hope in humanity, in the capacity of people to transform their points of view, their interests through dialogue by meeting the other part. And you have to transmit this hope to everyone you are working with. So, when Daesh arrived in Iraq, the so-called Islamic State, for many of our Iraqi friends and partners, it was also sometimes hard to believe that it was worth investing still in human rights campaigns, in peace building, when the humanitarian needs were so massive. Even some of our friends were saying, but why shall we keep on funding people that work on peace building? Maybe, every single penny needs to be spent on water and food distribution and, essential needs. And then instead you have the peace workers that are saying, yeah, okay, but then, we have fed the displaced people. We have liberated militarily those areas, but still people cannot go back, because they are afraid that if they go back to liberated areas, some militia will not let them be there. You know, the militia that liberated that area will not accept some of the returnees. They will only accept people of their tribe, of their sect, and then return doesn't happen. You know, all the underlying conflicts that were there and that allowed Daesh to arrive and occupy Iraq are still there. Nobody worked on them. And that's how even the anti-Daesh coalition realized that investing on grassroots peace building and reconciliation was absolutely necessary. So what are the challenges? Well, first of all, the international community, for the international community, of course, it's easier to fund, for example, a UN agency like UNDP to organize the stabilization programs and to put inside stabilization programs grassroots peace building and reconciliation. But then, first of all, UNDP doesn't have enough staff with expertise on the field. And then you get into the scheme and into the program of stabilization with very short-run projects, so short-run funding. And then you need to start working on peace building with programs that last 6 months. What do you do in 6 months? So little, you know? And then if the funding doesn't continue, and, you know, you have peace workers that started engaged in conflict situations that are very, very delicate, and then you withdraw the funding, I mean, those conflict situations can explode, you know, under the do no harm approach. It's very difficult to work that way. So what do you do? Well, then you say, so maybe that's not the right way to fund our interventions. We have to work better on establishing a long-term relationship with another donor. And, well, something that is working now, for example, in Nineveh, the governorate of Mosul, is a program we are doing with German support, the Federal Ministry of Economic Cooperation and Development through GIZ. And, well, the people you see in the pictures are the members of our conflict prevention team in Mosul. If you want to find this article on the homepage of our NGO, unponteper.it. And, you know, these people have some, you know, amazing stories. So, for example, the first one on the left is a blogger that is trying to work at the national level through websites to deconstruct the idea that all young people in Mosul are Daesh. Unfortunately, in most of Iraq, people think that the great majority of young people in Mosul were actually supporting Daesh. The second one almost died because he was he was, you know, victim of an explosive device, and indeed, you know, half of his face is face is ruined by the explosion. But he continued working with imams in all the mosques of Mosul to change the discourse, the religious discourse of imams, to push for coexistence and tolerance. The lady in the center is a trainer of a soccer team of girls in Mosul. And she's also an expert on UN Resolution 1325 on women, peace, and security. And so they are based in a cultural cafe in Mosul that they opened up with our support as a place for human rights activists, journalists, young people to meet and take a coffee and spend some good time and strategize together on how to rebuild Mosul, you know? These things, I mean, when you see them and when you see how determined these people are to make change happen, are amazing. And, you know, sometimes when you speak about, you know, politics in general, you think that we look at the power of politicians from below. But in fact, sometimes, you know, we feel it's the opposite. So when we sit and speak with a politician, then we have to simplify our words and say, okay, so the scenario is very complex, but I have to make it understandable and simple now, you know, because I'm speaking with a UN official, I'm speaking with a politician. And in fact, what we feel is that these civil society organizations are really knowledgeable, about the map of stakeholders with whom they play, and they know how to make things happen in Mosul. So, for example, when I just continue with practical examples, because I think they give really the sense of how things work in the field in very extreme conflict situations. So, at some point, some months ago, there was a major explosion in the center of Mosul. Close to a cafe, some civilians died, and then immediately some media started saying that there are 100 fighters of Daesh that are coming back to Mosul, so we need to rearm. The Peshmerga, the Kurdish Peshmerga, need to enter again Mosul, even though there was an agreement that they would stay outside, and the Shia militia as well, because Daesh is returning. And instead, it was just rumors, created. So the bomb was true, unfortunately. It was put there by a family whose family members were arrested. And then the tribe reacted by, putting this bomb in the center of Mosul. But it was not Daesh returning to the town. It was a mistake done by national security in that sense, because they didn't manage to track the bomb and switch it off. And but still, the rumors had been created for other military interests at that point, and the youth of Mosul immediately created a social media campaign saying the truth and explaining that Mosul is not going to become again a war city. And they immediately called young people from Mosul to go to the place and clean it up from the rubble and the what was there after the explosion. And they gathered all together, inviting people through social media for the following morning to have breakfast in that restaurant, And so that's the effectiveness of peace-building work that these people can do with very, very, very little means and with an amazing impact. So in this situation, what are the challenges we are facing? For example, at an Iraqi level, starting from there, you have political parties that do not see the gains from peace. So when they make, their calculations about what is convenient and what is not convenient for them, continuing to ignite conflict, sectarian conflict, seems to be still more convenient in electoral terms than to work on reconciliation. So those are big challenges, for example, in that context. UN agencies, as I mentioned, the experience, for example, with UNDP was difficult, working on the stabilization funds. With other agencies, it's more positive. UNFPA, for example, now just decided to change their policy from an emergency focus to a long-term development focus. And for example, they decided to invest for several years on prevention of violent extremism in Iraq. So rather than countering violent extremism, preventing violent extremism. So there are good and bad signs. The European Union. Well, big challenges at the level of the European Union. I was last week in Brussels. We had the yearly assembly of EPLO, the European Peacebuilding Liaison Office. That is a kind of lobbying agency of peacebuilding organization with the EU. And we had this context note to develop our new strategy for the next 5 years. And what we see is that the EU's, I just read because I think it's interesting, the EU's narrative around its place in the world in recent years has shifted from value-driven to principled pragmatism, as they write in their global strategy. And it has refocused its external policies on stemming migration, countering violent extremism rather than preventing. And it is increasing its support for hard security responses to conflict, including through a new planned European peace facility where there will be support for peace-building actions by civil society as well. But probably the majority of this facility will be dedicated to decide how to channel weapons and ammunition to parties in conflict areas. So, I mean, as we see it, this is worrying. And still, in the European External Action Service, there are many actors that are authentically devoted to work on conflict prevention. Their work is not easy within the organization. They don't have enough space. They don't receive enough attention. They don't receive enough funding. So often, I mean, we will hear more the perspective of Sanne on this. And but often, you know, we are allies, civil society organizations with brilliant people working within EU institutions to try to strategize and see how we can make space for peace building within the EU. But the time is not an easy one, the area. In Italy, challenges are big, not only for the actual political moment now and the choices of our government, but also because within the Italian cooperation, international cooperation sector, the knowledge about peace building is still quite low. At the moment, the Vice Minister Emanuela Del Re is probably working to change the language of the Italian international cooperation. In the next 3 years plan, strategic plan of the Italian cooperation, at least in the drafts that we saw, peace building language is present. But for example, it's, I mean, I become technical, but I mean, I think it's, you know, this is the moment where to share also this kind of details. So when the Italian cooperation mentions, for example, the SDG 16, the Sustainable Development Goal 16 that is related to peace and strong institutions, they don't manage to associate it to the correct codes of OECD DAC. You know, the OECD DAC codes are basically saying which are the categories of international cooperation that fall under that strategic goal, they don't have enough expertise even to connect, you know, that. And we have been given that suggestion, but we still don't know if it has been received. We'll see. Italy is also now piloting a program of civilian peace corps under the National Civil Service, Servizio Civile Italiano. And so there are pilot programs of civil peace corps, but even there, you know, it had to be a 3 years pilot program. But the first year, you know, the first group of people that were deployed have been staying in conflict areas until July last year. And until now, we haven't still received the funding to deploy the second group of civil peace corps. So we have lost an entire year. And so how can you measure the impact, you know, of this kind of pilot programs then? So it lacks seriousness, and this is very challenging for us. So how do we adjust? We try to learn as much as possible how to become more professional and knowledgeable in this field. So how do you build an early warning and early response mechanism in local conflicts? Not easy to find the right manuals, the right knowledge. You know, sometimes we feel we really have to sit down, analyze the situation and make it up, you know, and create a mechanism that makes sense. We learn about the do no harm approach. We study. And I mean, when we need to study and analyze better the situation, for example, the existence of an organization like the Agency for Peacebuilding is very important for us. And so I really take this chance to thank all the members of the agency for organizing this forum. I hope it's only the beginning of a series of meetings we can have to brainstorm about how to grow the peacebuilding field in Italy. And I'm you know, really happy to take more you know, questions afterwards or have discussion at lunch and even outside the formal environment of the table. But thanks for having me.